So the iPhone XS and Google Pixel 3 XL have been the two main smartphones used in my household since both were released late last year. The XS by my wife and the Pixel 3 XL by myself. And having a 6-month-old baby means we have tons and tons of photos and videos that have been taken on these smartphones. And I think that gives me a pretty good idea of both the image quality and really the overall character of the pictures and videos that come out of both of these phones. So then enter the Galaxy S10 Plus, which was released just a few weeks ago now. A good friend of mine, James, was kind enough to lend me his brand new Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, even before he'd switched the thing on, which is incredibly generous of him. And I thought, what an opportunity to compare what most people would categorize as the top 3 smartphone cameras available on the market right now. And that's exactly what we're gonna do in this video. So I've loaded the photos up onto my computer and we're gonna run through a range of different scenarios to see which smartphone takes the best pictures and videos in the differing conditions. So let's start with the classic, a portrait photo of a person. As soon as you see these photos next to each other, you can really see that the Pixel 3 XL does have generally the most pleasing looking image straight out of the box. Although that is really because the iPhone XS and the S10 Plus try to give you a little bit more information so that you can have some flexibility when editing in post. But for mine, the roll off into the blurs and the actual framing of the image as well in terms of how zoomed in it is, because both the iPhone XS and the Pixel 3 XL, they slightly crop in to make it look a little bit more like a portrait photo, whereas the S10 Plus uses a wider field of view. But I tend to prefer the Pixel 3 XL given that it looks really nice straight out of the box. And even though the colors aren't as accurate compared to the iPhone XS and the S10 Plus, which do have the more accurate colors, the Pixel 3 XL definitely looks the most pleasing to me. All right, moving into a range of photos that were taken in pretty bright daylight. We're gonna take a look at these first 3. And we can see here again that the Pixel 3 XL is really punchy and vivid. It looks really sharp as well. And then the iPhone XS is quite flat in comparison. And again, this is a pattern we see with photos out of the iPhone XS and the Pixel 3 XL, is that Apple really wants to give us as much flexibility in post when it comes to editing. So it has lots of detail in the shadows and it tries to retain those highlights a little bit more effectively as well. Whereas the Pixel 3 XL does a bit more post processing to the photos, which means it looks more pleasing to the eye, but there's not going to be as much flexibility when it comes to editing the photos from the Pixel 3 XL. Now, in terms of this photo from the S10 Plus, I think it sits quite nicely in between the iPhone XS and the Pixel 3 XL. It's still got quite punchy and vivid colors compared to the photo on the iPhone XS, but it's not quite as flat, which means people generally are going to prefer the photos from the S10 Plus straight out of the box compared to what we get on the iPhone XS, but it's not quite as punchy and sharp as the photo from the Pixel 3 XL. Just wanted to show you as well with the iPhone XS and the S10 Plus, we do of course have those secondary telephoto lenses, which means we can zoom in a bit further to whatever our subject is in the photo, meaning we retain more detail as opposed to using just digital zoom, which is what we'd have to do on the Pixel 3 XL. So that is a nice feature to keep in mind with both the iPhone XS and the S10 Plus. But then the S10 Plus takes it a stage further and gives us a really impressive super wide angle rear facing lens, which means we can capture these sorts of photos as you can see on the right. And as you can see, the field of view has increased immensely. We can see actually the surface that I was leaning on when taking the photo. It's just, there's so much more that you can fit in the frame, and I find this such a fun lens to use. And I think it's quite a big feature to keep in mind if you're someone who likes taking photos on your smartphone. So moving to our next scenario, this is another daylight photo with quite harsh light, except we have the shadow obviously on the bottom part of this pole. And as you can see, it's similar to the previous photo in that the iPhone XS retains a lot of that detail in the shadows and in the highlights. The S10 Plus tends to blow out the highlights, as you can see in the clouds just a little bit. And the Pixel 3 XL sits nicely in between here with retaining good detail in the shadows, but also not blowing out the white of the clouds either. In terms of sharpness and clarity, again, here you can see the iPhone XS looks quite a bit softer compared to the Pixel 3 XL and the S10 Plus. And this is going to be a recurring theme throughout the video because the Pixel 3 and S10 tend to add a bit of sharpening in the software process side of things. And whereas the iPhone XS, you're going to have to do that yourself in editing after the fact. So again, just taking a quick look at the telephoto lenses on the iPhone XS and the S10 Plus, I've actually used here the digital zoom feature to achieve a similar field of view with the Pixel 3 XL. And you can see that it actually holds up quite nicely compared to the other two phones, even though they are using dedicated telephoto lenses, which to me shows that you don't always need a dedicated telephoto lens to achieve a nice looking zoomed in portrait sort of photo. And again, just wanting to show you the wide angle lens on the S10 Plus. Like I said, it's been a lot of fun to use, and I think it is the preferred secondary lens option compared to a telephoto lens. You can see how awesome it looks here. It just makes your photos look so different and diverse. So I think it is a great feature to have and something to keep in mind when you're comparing these three smartphones. Right, so looking at a slightly more difficult scenario in which we're shooting directly at the sun, but with a heavily shaded area in the foreground. You can see all three smartphones are doing a good job of retaining the detail of that graffitied wall in the foreground. There are some lens flaring across each of the photos as well, but each camera is approaching its way of retaining the shadows slightly differently. So you can see, like the previous examples, the iPhone XS is really going out of its way to lift those shadows so we've got as much detail as possible, which is good if you're someone who enjoys editing your photos quite significantly after the fact. But for me, there is quite a bit of manipulation that you need to do to this photo to make it look more visually pleasing. Whereas the Pixel 3 XL and the S10 Plus, even though they look a little bit different as well, the images that they're providing look a lot nicer straight out of the box and require a lot less love than what we'd have to do with the iPhone XS. But for me, my favorite photo here is from the S10 Plus. I think the way that it renders the highlights and the shadows and also that lens flare looks the most visually pleasing. Another example in a pretty well lit scenario with some shade in the foreground, similar to before, iPhone XS, it looks really flat, whereas the Pixel 3 XL and S10 Plus look a bit more naturally visually pleasing. But again, my favorite here is the S10 Plus. This scenario is just trying to capture some of that natural bokeh rather than using a portrait mode for this one. I just wanted to get right up close to the foreground of this pole so that we could see what the natural fall off looks like here. And for me, the S10 Plus has the least amount of natural bokeh, which is interesting given it has that variable aperture on its primary lens. The Pixel 3 XL is my favorite out of the three here because the iPhone XS again looks a bit too flat. Yes, I could tweak it in post, but looking at them just as they are, my favorite here is the Pixel 3 XL. Another scenario here, very similar to the previous two, and the Pixel 3 XL and S10 Plus look very similar here, even more so than the previous examples, which just goes to show how impressive the cameras are on the S10 Plus, given that they're matching the Pixel 3 XL. The Pixel 3 XL does look a bit sharper compared to the photos from the other two smartphones, but all three photos are really high quality, and I like what each are doing with this scenario. Again, looking at another example of the wide angle lens on the S10 Plus, it looks really cool here. It just changes the look of your photos really intensely, actually. You're not going to want to use it all the time, but it is such a nice feature to have so that you can experiment with it and see how it changes the photos that you're taking. Here's another scenario where I really wanted to put the cameras through their paces by shooting directly at the sun. You can see it's in the middle there. Again, this is a really good example of how each smartphone renders colors. You can see the iPhone XS and the S10 Plus look quite warm in comparison to the Pixel 3 XL. And if you're not sure, you can't really see what I'm saying here, look at the sun. You can really see the change in color there. Again, the aggressive HDR and flat profile of the iPhone XS makes it slightly less visually appealing, although I think in this scenario, it would actually be beneficial because in the Pixel 3 XL and S10 Plus examples, we are losing quite a bit of detail when you look at some of those cars in the foreground. They are quite heavily shaded, whereas on the iPhone XS, we still have all that detail there. So just another example here of how each smartphone renders its colors. And this is a good example of where the S10 Plus pushes the vibrancy of the colors in its images quite a lot. It's quite aggressive at doing it, which does look quite pleasing out of the box, although slightly unnatural, but it does mean we have a lot less flexibility when it comes to editing the photos from the S10 Plus in post. Again, the iPhone XS with that aggressive HDR is making the image look quite a bit flatter compared to the other two photos, but I don't think a lot of tweaking needs to happen to this photo to make it look really, really nice. The Pixel 3 XL though is by far my favorite of the three here. The colors look natural. You can see that the blues look rich, although not too oversaturated. The greens look nice and we get lots of detail in that tree. So here out of the three, my favorite is the Pixel 3 XL. But again, just showing you how intense that wide angle lens is. This is literally standing in the same spot as where I was standing to take the previous photo. And you can see how much more of that tree we can see using that wide angle lens on the S10 Plus. So again, it's lots of fun. Right, so we've just covered and compared a whole heap of different daylight scenarios. And to be honest with you, given that most of our photo taking is in optimal light, those comparisons are going to be probably the best indicator as to which smartphone camera you're going to want to have in your pocket. Because if you're someone who wants to do lots of editing after the fact, then I'm sure the iPhone XS is for you. Whereas if you want photos that are just ready to go to social media straight away, then it's going to be either the Pixel 3 XL or the S10 Plus, depending on which look of the images you prefer. But let's take a really quick look at low light photos and see how these smartphones perform in non-optimal situations. So you're going to see in each of these comparisons that the photos from the Pixel 3 XL are going to blow the other two out of the water thanks to night sight. And even though, yes, it does make the photos look a little less natural, less like what my eyes were seeing when I was actually taking these photos, to be honest, I don't really want photos that look like what my eyes were seeing given that it was so dark. I actually don't mind the low light photos from the S10 Plus. They do still look quite good, quite detailed. There's enough information there, but again, compared to the Pixel 3 XL, it's just not even really a comparison. Unfortunately, the photos from the iPhone XS in low light conditions really do struggle, and they pale in comparison to the Pixel 3 XL and even the S10 Plus. And that's really because Apple hasn't implemented its own night sight feature as yet. They probably should have done it with the iPhone XS, but hopefully they do release something with their next lineup of smartphones later on this year, because really they aren't usable photos whatsoever. You're just going to keep them on your phone. You're not going to share them anywhere on social media. So just a quick selfie comparison here. This is using portrait mode on each of the phones. You can see the iPhone XS, despite software updates, it still struggles with some softening of the facial features. And even the S10 Plus has a little bit of that as well, even though I had beauty mode turned off. Now the Pixel 3 XL just looks phenomenal here. Yes, it does look quite edited, but for mine, that is my favorite look. And compared to the other two, it just looks so much sharper. It's got a lot more vibrancy in the image. So by far and away, the Pixel 3 XL is my favorite for taking selfies. And here's just a quick look at the secondary front-facing wide-angle camera on the Pixel 3 XL. Again, it's very similar to the wide-angle camera on the back of the S10 Plus. It's a lot of fun to have it. I think it really improves your selfie taking ability. You can fit so much more in the frame, and so having that feature is quite nice. So in terms of selfie taking, Pixel 3 XL wins this one hands down. Right, so we're finished with photography. So now we're going to look at the video side of things. So we're going to start by looking at a selfie vlog style front-facing camera test. So things to look out for are obviously image quality and color, but then stabilization, and a big one is going to be audio quality as well. Right, so starting off with the iPhone XS, the selfie camera, and this is sort of a vlog style scenario that you might find yourself in, where you're walking around, you're moving. There is a little bit of wind in the air as well, so keep that in mind as you're listening to the audio. But I'm interested to see, in comparison to the other two smartphones, what the image quality is like, and also obviously the audio quality as well. Right, so here we are with the Pixel 3 XL this time, but obviously using the Pixel 3 XL, we get the added benefit of a wider field of view, given that we have that secondary front-facing camera. We also just recently had a software update that supposedly improved the audio quality, but again, back to back with the iPhone XS and the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, it'd be interesting to see how that compares and how much worse or better it is compared to those two video recording smartphones. Right, so now the Galaxy S10 Plus, still with the front-facing camera, interested again to compare how the audio quality is compared to the previous two smartphones, and also just general image quality. Slightly wider field of view than the iPhone XS, but not quite as wide, I don't think, although it might be compared to the Pixel 3 XL. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. So this is actually quite a bit closer than what I was expecting. The audio improvements on the Pixel 3 XL are significant, and I actually think it makes it sound better than what we're hearing from the S10 Plus. But I do prefer the image quality on the S10 Plus, but in terms of overall image and audio quality, my favorite here is the iPhone XS. Right, so now the rear camera on the iPhone XS, looking at things like stabilization and whether or not the audio quality is much improved or worse compared to the front-facing camera. And then obviously we're going to compare it to the Pixel 3 XL and the Galaxy S10 Plus. Now the rear video camera test with the Pixel 3 XL. Again, I'm not being too cautious with my hand here, not trying to be too stable or anything like that. So take a look at the stabilization, obviously also the general image quality, and finally, again, listen for the audio quality compared to the iPhone XS and the upcoming Galaxy S10 Plus. Right, so a fairly significant change when switching to the Galaxy S10 Plus rear video camera test, because I've decided to use the wide angle camera for this test. Now, the reason being that I think if you're going to use the rear-facing camera for this sort of a talking to camera scenario, then you want to be using the wide-angle view so that you can ensure you're capturing everything, as much of your environment as possible. So I think that's a big benefit of the two previous smartphones. But let me know your thoughts on the image quality as well, the stabilization, and of course the audio quality. Right, just to be as thorough as possible, also doing a quick video camera test with the rear-facing standard lens, not the wide angle, just so you can see what this would look like if you wanted to use it instead. Is the image quality any better, any clearer than the wide angle? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll let you know mine in a moment as well. So we have a similar story here as the previous test, in that the S10 Plus has the best looking image quality in my opinion, but the worst sounding audio quality, making it actually quite an unappealing option because that audio is quite muffled compared to the other two options. But again, for this test, overall my favorite is the iPhone XS, but the Google Pixel 3 XL isn't too far behind, although the audio isn't quite as nice as what we hear on the iPhone XS. So this test is a little bit different than the previous two in that my favorite image quality was actually from the iPhone XS. And since we're not comparing audio, even though we know the audio was the best from the iPhone from the previous two examples, then actually it's quite easy to summarize and say that the best video camera option in terms of these three smartphones is the iPhone XS. And then probably my second favorite is the Google Pixel 3 XL, surprisingly, and then followed by the Galaxy S10 Plus. So looking at these low light video comparison tests, you can see that the image from the iPhone XS is quite nice, despite the fact that it is quite poor conditions. We can see that it's not trying to overexpose the image, which means that the shadows, yes, they are grainy, but they still look okay. Whereas then when we jump to the Pixel 3 XL's image, you can see it's trying to brighten everything up, which means the shadows become quite grainy, and overall the image looks just a little bit blotchy compared to the iPhone XS. And then the Galaxy S10 Plus kind of sits in the middle here, where it's not trying to overexpose the image as much as the Pixel 3 XL, but it's certainly not quite as nice and as clean as the image we got out of the iPhone XS. Right, so there you have it. That is the comparison between what we'd call the top three smartphone cameras on the market right now. And to be honest, it's actually quite a bit closer than what I was originally expecting. I think in terms of photography, my favorite is still the Google Pixel 3 XL in terms of the way that it renders those images. They just look so pleasing straight out of the box. And my favorite in terms of video is the iPhone XS. No surprises there. But the Galaxy S10 Plus kind of sits in the middle in both categories. So it's a pretty good all-around performer. But those are just my subjective thoughts, but obviously this isn't a scientific test, so I really want to know what your thoughts are. So let me know down in the comments below, which smartphone camera do you think performed best, and let me know why you think that's the case. Aside from that, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will catch you later.